In New Orleans, music masks secrets, and some melodies demand blood. A Miles Harrington mystery. Requiem for the Crescent City. Chapter 1, Dead Man's Tune. Miles Harrington stepped off the red-eye at Louis Armstrong New Orleans International, just as the first glimmer of dawn teased the horizon. His tailored charcoal suit was rumpled from the overnight flight, but his posture remained unbowed. He'd exchanged New York's concrete canyons for the languid sweep of Spanish moss-draped oaks, and even in the hazy morning light, he sensed this city breathed differently, an intoxicating mix of promise and menace. By the time he reached Bayou St. John, the carnival season's buzz was already in the air. Colorful beads dangled from low-hanging branches, and die-hard revelers, coffee in hand, rehearsed dance steps along the narrow river road. The bayou itself lay still, its black water mirror-smooth under a gauzy mist. Miles surveyed the scene, a cluster of unmarked police cruisers, a handful of uniforms, and strung between two cypress trees, the stark yellow tape that warned, "Crime scene, do not cross." Detective Anya Dupré, New Orleans PD's homicide liaison, greeted him with a curt nod. Her high cheekbones and wind-tousled hair suggested someone who'd seen too many horrors, yet somehow retained her equilibrium. "Glad you made it," she murmured, pulling a folding chair from her cruiser. "City's been on edge since they pulled her out." Miles donned a pair of latex gloves and slipped under the tape. The body lay at the water's edge, half submerged, legs splayed like a fallen marionette. What held his attention most was the brass trumpet resting across her chest, valves pressed to her collarbone as though she'd clutched it in a final, desperate gesture. He crouched, noting the way the horn's bell gleamed, an eerie beacon in the dim morning. "Victims Mira Lagrange," Dupré said, her voice low. 32 famed jazz singer, local legend. Last seen performing at Club L'Absinthe last night. She handed him a set of photographs. In one, Lagrange's face glittered under stage lights, eyes closed, mouth curved in a sultry half-smile. Miles studied the contrast between that vitality and the stillness before him. He stood and scanned the surroundings. A single white feather drifted atop the water, curling in a slow eddy. Bits of confetti, emerald green, royal purple, glittering gold spattered the muddy bank. Mardi Gras was still weeks away, yet its early trappings already colored the scene. "Someone staged this," Miles said, voice calm but firm. "This pose, the trumpet, it's ritualistic." Dupré frowned. "City funeral customs have their theatrics, but this is different." They moved down the bank. Footprints, both human and animal, marred the damp earth. Miles pointed to a set of shallow impressions leading into the reeds. "The killer left on foot," he observed. "Probably followed the boardwalk until the water's too deep to continue." Dupré made a note. Forensics teams swabbed the horn for prints and DNA. They're combing the boat slips for anything suspicious. Miles inhaled deeply, tasting the muggy sweetness of the bayou air. "We'll need Lagrange's last known schedule, where she was, who she met, and any unusual behavior, and locate anyone who could override her contract or threatened her career." She nodded. "Manager's already on our list, Owen DuPont, hard-driving type. Says he found her body this morning during his run." "Let's bring him in," Miles said, then paused, "and find out why a singer with a sold-out weekend show would be up before sunrise wandering the bayou." Dupré hesitated before guiding him to a surveillance van parked nearby. Its windows were fogged, monitors flickering with grainy footage from Club L'Absinthe and surrounding streets. Miles leaned forward, tracing the victim's last hours. The club's neon sign buzzing alive at 11:45 p.m. Lagrange laughing in the doorway, arm linked with Dupont's, her stepping away toward Royal Street at midnight, alone. He paused the tape on a hooded figure slipping behind the club's dumpster. The person's features were obscured, but their gait, deliberate, unhurried, told Miles they weren't fleeing in panic. "Zoom in on that," he murmured. and cross-referenced that timestamp with phone records from nearby cell towers. Dupré tapped keys. On it! A sudden squawk drew their attention. A single egret rose from the reeds, its white wings stark against the grey sky, and spiraled upward before disappearing among the oaks. Miles watched it go, a flicker of unease settling in his chest. Symbolism, superstition, he didn't know which held more sway here. But in New Orleans, he reminded himself, the line between myth and reality blurred like the bayou's edge. Turning back to the monitors, he met Dupré's eyes. This city has its own rhythm. To find a killer, I need to understand both the music and the silence beneath it. She offered a tight smile, then began pulling files on Dupont, the club's owner, and Lagrange's circle of confidants. Miles rose and surveyed the mist-shrouded water one more time. The horn's last note had been silenced forever, but as he watched the morning light deepen, he vowed to coax the hidden melody back into the open, no matter how many masks the killer wore, or how many secrets the bayou tried to keep. Thus began his descent into New Orleans's underbelly, where every brass note might echo a lie, and the truth lay buried in the swamp's dark reflectivity. Chapter 2, Shadows on the Parade Route. Carnival flags snapped overhead as Miles Harrington and Detective Anya Dupré climbed into a battered NOPD SUV. The sunrise had burnt away most of the mist, leaving the streets of Bayou St. John streaked with beads of early morning dew. Miles glanced over at Dupré, who had her laptop balanced on her knees and a stack of witness statements at her side. First witness sighting, she said, tapping the screen. Late last night, around 12:30 a.m., several locals spotted Mira Lagrange heading east along the parade route toward the quarter. They say she was arguing, voice raised, gestures sharp, with Owen Dupont, her manager. Miles folded his arms, the leather of his jacket creaking softly. We need to talk to those people. If she was upset, it narrows down motive and timeline. They rolled onto Esplanade Avenue, where strings of orange lights still flickered from the night's revelry. A trio of street performers, jugglers in purple sequined vests, packed up their props beside a shuttered trolley stop. Dupré tapped her radio, and within minutes a young officer approached, guiding them to a cluster of 3 eyewitnesses. The first, a wiry man in paint-splattered overalls, introduced himself as Carlos Ruiz. He'd been sketching the oak-lined street when he saw the confrontation. "It was bad, man," he said, voice low. "She was yelling, 'You promised me more,' and he was like, 'You'll get what you asked for, be patient.'" Then she stormed off, heading into the quarter. Miles nodded, studying Ruiz's lined face. "What time was this again?" "About 12:25, Ruiz replied. "Right after I packed up." Next was a middle-aged woman, Marisol Benoit, tending a folding table of homemade pralines. Her hands shook slightly as she poured coffee into a styrofoam cup. "Yes," she confirmed softly. "I saw the singer and her manager argue near the old oak. She looked furious, and then she turned down Chartres Street." She showed Dupré a quick sketch on a napkin, a silhouette of 2 figures beneath a lamppost. The third witness, a lanky teenager named Jamal, had been crewing floats earlier that day. He described seeing Mira pause at the corner, where a streetcar rattles past, glancing back over her shoulder as if expecting someone. "She looked like she heard something, footsteps or a voice, but there was nobody behind her," he said. Then she walked on real quick into the dark alleys of the quarter. Miles filed the statements on his tablet. "What about the floats? Any late-night maintenance crews around there?" Jamal shook his head. "Not after 10. Everything shuts down after the streetcars stop." Dupré frowned. "So she's alone in the quarter after midnight, walking toward Club L'Absinthe, maybe. But why detour back toward the bayou?" Miles stood and brushed off his trousers. "Maybe she was meeting someone else, or someone forced her in that direction." He paused, scanning the silhouettes of wrought-iron balconies overhead. "Let's retrace her steps." They slipped from Esplanade onto Chartres Street and into the French Quarter proper. Its brick sidewalks still damp, street lamps casting pools of light that dissolved into shadowy alcoves. Miles led the way, flashlight in hand, pausing at the corner where Marisol had seen Mira pivot. He knelt to inspect the cobbles, noting a faint smear of lipstick on a poured drink cup discarded near a drain. "Dupré bagged that cup," he said, "and canvassed the bars from here down to Toulouse. Someone might remember offering her a drink." Inside the first bar, a jazz lounge called Crescent Note, a sleepy bartender shook his head. "Saw her in here earlier, around 11 for a quick set. Then she left with Dupont." He wiped a glass with a rag stained maroon with old wine. "Never saw her after that, though." The next place, a dimly lit piano bar, offered the same story. Mira wasn't among their late crowd. At the third, a courtyard tucked behind wrought-iron gates, Miles found something more. A security camera perched in a corner, its lens pointed at the doorway where midnight revelers trickled through. "Get me the footage," he said to Dupré, indicating the battered monitor behind the bar. The proprietor, an austere woman named Celeste, sighed and unlocked a filing cabinet to retrieve a hard drive. "Hopefully it wasn't looped over already," she muttered. While Dupré hooked it up, Miles studied the courtyard's niches and alcoves. A breeze rustled the hanging ferns, and the distant wail of a siren echoed through the streets. Even here, a block from the bayou, the way of that first crime scene lingered. On the screen, the last 4 hours replayed in grainy black and white. Mira's performance at Club L'Absinthe, her embrace with Dupont, then her lone figure stepping into the courtyard at 12:35 a.m. She paused, looked around as if expecting someone, then tapped on her phone. There was no reply. She pocketed the device, looked toward the alley at the courtyard's edge, and froze. Miles enlarged the frame. A man emerged from the darkness wearing a wide-brimmed hat, coat collar turned up. His stride was deliberate. Mira turned and followed him down the alley. "Enhance that," he whispered to Dupré. The image sharpened slightly. Now they could see the man's lean frame and the brim of his hat. "Can you trace him down?" Miles asked. Dupré tapped at the hard drive's menu. "He's headed toward Royal Street at 12:36. After that, the camera goes dark." Miles exhaled. So she chose to follow him, or thought she could handle whomever it was. He rose, pacing. "We need to find out who that man is, and why Mira trusted him enough to leave her manager's side." Dupré locked the drive back in its drawer. Manager's statement says they argued over her wanting to switch labels. He denies threatening her, insists he was concerned about her safety alone at night. "Typical spin," Miles muttered. "Yet he left her alone. We can't rule him out." He pocketed his phone. "I want phone records, both hers and Dupont's, from midnight on. Let's see who she called, who called her, and if any unknown number pinged her phone in those final minutes." Dupré nodded, already keying instructions into her laptop. Outside, the quarter stirred with its usual contradictions, beauty and danger entwined, notes of laughter drifting from late-night bars as the new day dawned. Miles closed his eyes for a moment, listening. In New Orleans, every creak of a shutter, every distant horn felt pregnant with possibility. He glanced back at the security monitor. Mira Lagrange's silhouette receded into blackness, leading him deeper into mystery's heart. He straightened, shoulders squared. "Let's shine a light on those shadows." Together, Miles and Dupré slipped out of the bar and back into the quarter's labyrinth, where every mask concealed a secret, and behind every mask could be a murderer. Chapter 3. Voodoo at the Crossroads. Night fell like a velvet curtain draped over New Orleans, and Miles Harrington felt its weight pressing against the windows of Detective Dupré's makeshift command post in Central Station. Between stacks of printouts and flickering monitors, an older man in a dark suit waited. Father Marcel Baptiste, a priest at St. Augustine's, whose reputation for speaking blunt truths about voodoo had made him both respected and feared. Dupré introduced them curtly. "Father Marcel says he witnessed something unusual by the old Crossroads shrine last night. He claims there was a ritual." The priest's eyes gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light. "Detective Harrington, you must understand. This is no superstition. New Orleans' power flows from the bayou and the crossroads where travelers make pacts and destinies shift. He pulled from his satchel a small bundle of twigs bound by crimson thread. I found this near the body. My parishioners call it a gris-gris charm. Protection for some, curse for others. Miles turned the twigs over in his fingers. The thread was looped in a crooked figure 8. The wood bare a faint smell of burning basil. He had seen similar objects in anthropology textbooks, but never handled one so intimate, imprinted by ritual. You discovered this where exactly? Bayou St. John beneath the Spanish moss, Marcel replied. At precisely midnight I was there praying for my niece's health when I saw figures moving among the trees, hooded, chanting. When they dispersed, they left this and a red smear on the altar stones. Dupré's eyes flashed. We found traces of what we thought was ceremonial blood on those stones. Forensics is testing whether it's human. She nodded at Miles. So it ties in. Miles slipped the bundle into an evidence bag. What do your sources tell you about the participants? Any names, faces? Marcel shook his head. I have only witness accounts, whispers in the parish. They speak of an underground society, musicians, socialites, even city officials dabbling in arcane rites to secure fortune or revenge. He leaned forward. Mira Lagrange's charm was twisted, corrupted. Someone wanted to invoke a curse, not protection. A low hum of the air conditioner filled the pause. Miles stared at the priest, then at Dupré. He had heard rumors of a secret voodoo scene in New Orleans, one distant from the tourist rituals on Decatur Street. Could it be connected to Lagrange's murder? He decided they needed fresh eyes on the scene. Dupré, assemble a small team. We're heading to the Crossroads Shrine at first light. I want photos of every symbol, every splash of color on those altar stones, and a full sweep for additional charms or offerings. Outside the station, the humid breeze tasted of jasmine and exhaust fumes. Miles tucked the gris-gris into his jacket pocket and climbed into the cruiser. As Dupré navigated toward Bayou St. John, his thoughts swirled. Murder, music, magic, woven tightly in this city's tapestry. At dawn's edge they parked where a narrow dirt path led beneath gnarled oaks. Miles stepped out, boots sinking slightly in the damp soil. The shrine was a simple arrangement of river-worn stones at a fork where two trails met. Candles long since burned away left ash rings. Scattered beads gleamed in the morning light like tiny lost Mardi Gras treasures. And on the central stone the same crimson smear, dark now, crusted but unmistakably stained. Dupré snapped photos while Miles crouched to inspect the ground. He found fragments of wilted leaves, bay leaf, basil, even bits of rose petals. Ingredients for binding or banishment, he murmured. As she lifted the evidence bag containing Marcel's charm, Miles noticed faint footprints circling the stones, barefoot impressions, toes splayed, as if the ritualist had paced. He photographed them, then rose, brushing his jacket. Anyone local known for conducting real voodoo beyond the commercial ceremonies? He asked. Dupré consulted her notes. There's Papa Ducroix, old Haitian émigré. Some say he charges obscene prices for true spiritual work. And Madame Renée, a griot who mixes fortune-telling with root work, but she's very public. Keep them both in mind, Miles said, but also canvass the bayou cottages nearby. The ritual might be local, not tourist. They moved aside to let a pair of joggers pass, their feet kicking up dew as they ran between the trees. Miles watched them fade into the shadows, then turned back to the shrine. The bayou water lapped softly against the bank, as if urging him deeper into this mystery. Back in the car, Dupré's phone buzzed. She frowned. Forensics confirmed the blood on the altar is human, type A, same as the victim. Miles swallowed. So the killer staged both the body pose and the ritual, melding Lagrange's death with a curse. He stared at the road ahead. This isn't about superstition. It's a signature, fear as weapon. Dupré nodded. And it's meant to terrify anyone who dares to investigate. Miles tapped his temple. Then we need to think like them. What message are they sending? Who in Lagrange's circle would believe in and fear That message enough to let it guide them. As the cruiser rattled away, Miles studied the tree line. In New Orleans, power and paranoia whispered from the moss. Somewhere among those oaks lurked the mastermind, an orchestrator of death and darkness, and Miles Harrington was determined to shine daylight on a secret that thrived in midnight's rites. The bayou receded behind them, but its shadows would follow, and the crossroads curse was only just beginning to unravel. Chapter 4: Midnight at Club L'Absinthe. Miles Harrington approached Club L'Absinthe under a sky thick with humidity and cigar smoke haze. The club's neon sign, an attenuated green absinthe lamp, buzzed overhead, casting wavering shadows on the cracked sidewalk. Through its tall windows, the low thrum of a double bass and the muted clatter of cocktail glasses drifted into the night. This was where Mira Lagrange had sung her last set. This was where her life had intersected with death. Detective Anya Dupré fell in beside him, her expression taut. "Owner says he closed up at 1:30, she murmured, gesturing toward the bouncer at the door. "He found nothing out of the ordinary. Until this morning." Miles nodded and produced his badge. The bouncer, a broad-shouldered man in a pressed black shirt, stepped aside wordlessly. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of spilled whiskey and chipped varnish. Red velvet banquettes lined the walls, and brass fixtures gleamed dimly above a low stage. A lone bartender polished glasses behind the bar. A house drummer gathered his sticks at an empty drum rack. "Detective Harrington," barked the bartender, lifting his chin. "I'm Simone. I've been told you'll want the last tapes." He led them to a back room where two aging VCRs sat beside a tangle of coaxial cables. "Club's got 2 cameras, one on stage, one in the back hallway. But we reuse tapes every week. I grabbed the last 2 before they got erased." Anya slipped the tapes into a portable player Miles had insisted on bringing. They watched the stage feed first. Mira's final performance, her voice smoky with emotion as the band coaxed a low D from the horn. She wore a sequined black dress that caught the stage lights like distant stars. As the song ended, she paused, bowed, and walked off stage. Her swagger confident, unshakable. Then the hallway feed, a grainy corridor flanked by peeling wallpaper. Mira appeared at 12:10 a.m., pausing to adjust her shawl. Her stride was purposeful. Moments later, Owen DuPont emerged behind her, his face pale and drawn. They spoke for a heartbeat, too brief to hear but charged with urgency. Mira shook her head, turned, and strode away. DuPont's shoulders slumped. He watched her go before turning back toward the manager's office. Miles froze the frame. She wasn't alone, he observed, but the figure behind DuPont. He rewound the tape, pausing on a flash of movement at the hallway's far end. There, a dark silhouette slipped around the corner, hand extended as if to grasp hers, and then, just as quickly, gone. Simone's eyes darted. That hallway leads to a service exit and the alley behind the club. Miles tapped his pen against his notebook. "We'll need that exit secured. No one in or out without our say." He turned to Anya. "Run a check on all staff schedules who had key access last night, and get me the club's cleaning crew manifest. Someone could have hidden in plain sight." Dupré nodded, already pulling out her phone. Meanwhile, Miles rose and moved toward the stage. He knelt to inspect the worn floorboards, then lifted a section near the trap door marked "Storage." The wood felt loose. He pried it with a gloved hand and peered into a dark crawl space. The faint smell of stale beer and mildew drifted up. He ducked inside. Below, rows of dusty crates bore labels, bar supplies, extra beads, and one scrawled "Personal Effects." He recognized a familiar brass trumpet case peeking from beneath a tarp too small for Mira's horn. He lifted it free. Inside lay a second trumpet mouthpiece, its rim smeared with a dull red stain. He emerged, holding it like evidence. Dupré glanced up from her phone. "That's not in the inventory list." "No," Miles said. "Looks like someone stashed it here after the shooting, maybe planning to switch it with hers." He pointed at the stage. "If the killer wanted to control the scene, They'd need access to her instrument. This mouthpiece could have been swapped before her set, implanted with something or used as a marker. Simone's lips parted in realization. She struggled. I found my sax's mouthpiece jammed in the locker room toilet this morning. Thought it was a damn prank. Miles met Dupré's eyes. Locker room, we search there next. He slipped the piece into an evidence bag. This killer doesn't just kill, they play a game, and they're daring us to follow the tune. Back in the hallway, the bouncer and 2 off-duty officers sealed the service exit. Miles inspected the lock, a simple latch easily manipulated from inside. Dupré handed him a pointer light. He swept the doorframe. Faint scuff marks, shoe print size. He pressed the light into the grooves, tiny fibers caught in the latch teeth. Purple thread, possibly from a Mardi Gras bead bag. Fiber analysis, he instructed. Compare it to all bead sacks sold in the quarter. Could lead us to the suspect. He stepped outside into the alley. The brick walls dripped with condensation. Trash bins lined the path. Empty bottles and confetti littered the ground. A stray cat darted past, pausing to watch him before slinking into the shadows. He followed the alley to the front, tracing footprints. They led to a side door marked Private, the back entrance for performers. He tested the handle, locked. Above it, a small speaker blared a faint jazz riff, presumably to mask noise inside. Miles jabbed at his phone. Get maintenance logs for that sound system. See who accessed its wiring panel last night. Anya materialized beside him. Also, club's neighbors reported hearing a woman scream around 12:45. They thought it was part of an act, figured it was sound check. She shuddered. No one checked? No, Miles said softly. They expected entertainment, not murder. He exhaled and surveyed the neon glow spilling through the windows. This club is ground zero. Everything, her argument, the hallway meeting, the stashed mouthpiece, points here. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the gris-gris charm. And this, he said, turning it in his hand, someone wanted the ritual linked to the performance. They staged it all to look like a supernatural killing, spread fear through every note. Anya shivered as the alley's humid air pressed close. So what's next? Miles pocketed the charm and met her gaze. We flush out the players, manager, staff, any outsider with a reason to hide in the shadows. Then we confront the killer when they make their next move. And trust me, they'll move again, once they know we're playing along. He surveyed the club's entrance one last time. The double bass melody hummed within, but now it sounded like a warning. In New Orleans, where music and myth tangled, a single discordant chord could unleash carnage. And Miles Harrington was determined to compose the finale, no matter how dark the key. Chapter 5. Portrait of a Nightcrawler. Detective Anya Dupré's phone buzzed just after dawn, a message from the Orleans photography lab. Found unclaimed roll of film, come by. Miles Harrington arrived 15 minutes later, the humid morning air already sticky on his collar. The lab was a tidy storefront on Dauphine Street, its windows fogged by early customers clutching coffee. Inside, the proprietor, an aging man with silver-streaked hair named Henri Landry, greeted them with a grave nod. You asked about film dropped off late last night, he said, leading them to a narrow counter stacked with envelopes. No name, no request form, just this. He held out a single white envelope stamped with a greasy finger smudge. Miles slit it open. Inside lay a roll of black and white negatives still unprocessed. He tucked on gloves while Dupré powered up the film scanner. In minutes, images flickered onto the screen. Street lamps and empty sidewalks, a lone figure drifting through the quarter, always clutching something, sometimes a camera, sometimes nothing more than an empty hand. Whoever shot this didn't want to develop it themselves, Miles observed. They dropped it here expecting someone else to do the work. Dupré skimmed the frames. That's the alley behind Club Labsinthe. Timestamp 12:40 a.m. and here. She enlarged frame 7, Mira Lagrange, illuminated by a single streetlight, standing near a wrought-iron fence. Behind her, half hidden in shadow, A man in a trench coat holds up what looks like a camera. Flash poised to fire. Miles's eyes narrowed. That has to be the missing photojournalist. What was his name? Henry shrugged. I didn't catch, but if you look at the metadata, he pointed at the corner of the display, Charis 95. Could be the photographer's initials. James Harris, Dupré murmured. He worked for a small art magazine in town, documenting jazz culture. His editor filed a missing person report this morning. Miles leaned back. So Harris was trailing Mira, either investigating her, framing her, or working with someone else. And he captured the man in the trench coat. He clicked forward to frame 9. A closer shot of the photographer himself. Lean, spectacled, eyes darting with urgency. Let's cross-reference James Harris's known associates, he said, and find out where that trenchcoat figure disappeared to after the shot. Dupré keyed in her tablet. I'm pulling Harris's last calls. His phone pinged a tower near the bayou at 1:05 a.m., then went dead. She tapped another icon. And there's a payment record. Harris bought film and flash cartridges at Midnight Photo Supply at 11:45 p.m. yesterday. Miles frowned. We'll need the security footage from Midnight Photo. If the trenchcoat person picked up the film there, we might get their face. He turned to Henri. Can you hold on to these negatives? We'll courier them back to the station for forensics. Henri nodded, already jotting down a receipt. Outside, Miles and Dupré paused beneath a gas lamp, its flickering glow accentuating the quarter's time-worn facade. Manager Dupont's alibi was they parted ways here near the club, Miles said. But images show Mira headed deeper into the quarter with someone else. Dupont wasn't part of that, and he couldn't have been the one trailing her at 12:40. Dupré chewed her lip. He claimed he ran to his car after their argument, so he couldn't have been with Harris either, which suggests a third party, Miles said. Someone who both wanted to document Mira's movements and leverage it, maybe for blackmail. He paused, watching a funeral procession drift through the street, mourners in somber suits. The killer may have used Harris's work to frame events, then disposed of the photographer once the job was done. Dupré glanced toward Royal Street. Let's follow the trail. Harris's phone died near the bayou. His camera bag was found abandoned at a dock slip 2 hours later. She led the way to a waiting car. They drove in silence along Esplanade, the bayou gleaming beside them, until they reached the docks. Miles stepped onto the rickety planks, peering into the dark water below. A lone derelict skiff bobbed against the pilings. Harris's camera bag lay tossed on the pier, its leather fractured, lens caps missing. He unzipped it carefully. Inside were Mira's business cards, a notebook filled with scribbled observations, and a Polaroid, the only color image. It showed Mira smiling with an unfamiliar man. Tall, dark hair, wearing a tuxedo. The background was indistinct, but Miles recognized the ornate balcony railings of Antoine's restaurant. Did Harris get this developed? Dupré asked, crouching beside him. He must have snapped it just before or after the shooting, and that tuxedo looks familiar. I've seen someone dressed like that at Club L'Absinthe in the VIP area. Miles studied the Polaroid's margin. There, written in faint ink, Midnight Rendezvous. Dupré tapped her phone. Owen Dupont hosted a VIP dinner at Antoine's last night. Exclusive guests only. He was seen in a tuxedo. She paused. Manager's alibi just cratered. Miles pocketed the Polaroid. He argued with Mira over her contract, then slipped away to host his guests. Meanwhile, he hired or coerced Harris to follow her, to build leverage. The gris-gris charm and staged ritual were meant to drive her into fear and into his hands. He stood, gaze fixed on the watery horizon. Then he disposed of the photographer to bury the evidence and orchestrated the murder, to look like a supernatural sacrifice. Dupré exhaled. He's playing a deadly game and betting no one will see the strings. She looked at Miles. What's our next move? Miles snapped the camera bag shut. We collect Dupont's guest list, question each attendee and find out who climbed the balcony at Antoine's at midnight. When we have a witness who places him at the murder scene or in possession of that trumpet mouthpiece, we confront him." He paused, letting the bayou's lapping waters echo in his mind. "It's time for the final portrait, the moment everything goes dark." Dupré nodded, determination in her eyes. As they drove away, the overlooks of New Orleans slipped past. Masked revelers gathering, church bells tolling, the city itself holding its breath. Miles knew the killer's portrait was nearly complete. Soon, the final exposure would reveal a face forever stained by murder. Chapter 6. Secrets Beneath the Balcony. The morning sun glinted off wrought-iron balconies as Miles Harrington and Detective Anya Dupré stood before Antoine's grand facade. Last night's revelers were gone, but the heat lingered in the thick stone air. Wild jasmine spilled from window boxes, offering a heady contrast to the city's undercurrent of danger. Miles adjusted his tie, a formality for a scene of clandestine rendezvous, and Dupré checked her notebook, heavy with names and timestamps. "VIP guest list, please," Miles requested of the maitre d', a prim man with a steely gaze. Silver tray in hand, he beckoned them toward a private alcove. Mr. Dupont hosted 12 patrons for a midnight tasting menu, course by course until the jazz band began their set. He withdrew a ledger and slid it across the marble. "Here," he said curtly. Miles scanned the names: socialites, local politicians, an art gallery owner, and one entry that made him pause. Henri Leclerc, private collector. He looked up at Dupré. "Isn't Leclerc the patron who funded Lagrange's last European tour?" She nodded. "The same. He's known for acquiring rare recordings and instruments. He and Lagrange had a public falling out over royalties last spring." "Keep him in mind," Miles said. "He had motive, access, and a reputation for playing dangerous games." He refolded the ledger and led Dupré toward the courtyard beneath the balcony where their target stood last night. A narrow hatch in the stone floor marked a service entrance. They pried it open with gloved hands, revealing a steep wooden ladder descending into darkness. A musty scent rose, old air mixing with something metallic. Miles clicked on his flashlight and climbed down first. Dupré followed, her jacket sleeves brushing against the ladder rungs. At the bottom, they found themselves in a low-ceilinged vault lined with crates and dusty wine barrels. Faded chalk markings on the wall. "Your 12 Barolo. No 7 Sauterne," suggested this was once a wine cellar. Now it served a different purpose. Miles swept the beam across the room. A rusted filing cabinet stood against one wall, its drawers half open. Nearby, stacks of framed photographs lay face down on a wooden table, their swollen silver backing curling at the edges. Dupré knelt beside the cabinet and tugged a drawer free. Inside were envelopes, each labeled with a date and a name. She slid one open. "Mira Lagrange, November 23, 94. Inside lay a letter, typed on expensive stationery, threatening to expose Lagrange's secret debts if she didn't comply with undisclosed demands. "They've been blackmailing her for months," Dupré said, voice low. Miles picked up a photograph from the table, a Polaroid, edges blood-spattered. In it, Lagrange stood beneath a New York City fire escape, eyes wide, lips parted in mid-sentence. Across her chest, someone had scrawled in black marker, "Sing for me or pay the price." He placed it back carefully. Whoever held this cellar held her career and her life in their hands. He frowned at the chalk marks. One arrow pointed to a loose brick. He pressed it, and a section of wall swung inward on hidden hinges. Behind it lay a narrow tunnel, damp and cold, lit only by their flashlights. Old pipes dripped. The air echoed with distant water. Miles hesitated at the threshold. "This leads out beneath the alley next to Club l'Absinthe," he guessed. They needed a back door into that private balcony. Dupré followed him inside. So the killer could slip in unseen, swap the mouthpiece, rig the ritual items, and vanish without detection. Miles moved through the tunnel, scanning the walls. Mid-passage he found scrawled words in charcoal. Music bleeds truth. Underneath, a crudely drawn voodoo mask. Our killer's signature, he muttered. They want us to know it's more than murder. It's a statement. They emerged in a narrow service alley, brick walls glistening with mildew. A single door led up to the balcony, where Lagrange and Dupont had their final argument. Miles tested the latch. It was locked, but the hinges shimmered with fresh oil. Recently maintained, he observed. They keep this whole operation, cellar, tunnel, ritual shrine, hidden in plain sight. Outside, the afternoon throng filed past. The quarter's day shift bustling in and out of cafes, oblivious to the rash of nightmares unfolding beneath their feet. Dupré slipped a ribbed fiber sample into her evidence bag. Matches the purple thread from the mouthpiece latch. He nodded. All our clues converge here. The balcony, the tunnel, the blackmail letters, the ritual shards. He looked at her, eyes steely. We have to trace who organized this network. Leclerc, Dupont, the blackmailer. They all intersect through this cellar. They retraced their steps through the tunnel, resealing the hidden door behind them. In the cellar, Miles found a final clue, a ledger bound with red ribbon, tucked beneath barrel staves. He opened it. Columns of names, payments, dates, entries for performance arrangement, spiritual consultation, and ominously, final disbursement. He read the last line aloud. March 2nd, 95, ceremony complete. Release fees transferred. His jaw tightened. That's last night's date. And ceremony complete is a clear reference to the ritual. The fee transferred. Where? He tapped the page. Cross-reference those account numbers with DuPont's bank. Whoever got paid is the one who pulled every string. Dupré hit her phone keys. On it. She paused, then looked up, voice tense. Miles, I just got something. The account goes to a shell company registered in Leclerc's name. Leclerc Holdings. Miles closed the ledger. So Leclerc subcontracted to DuPont, who managed the logistics, hired Harris to document everything, and employed local ritual specialists to stage the gris-gris. He slid the ledger into an evidence bag. Motives, money, power, and a twisted notion of art as control. Dupré took a steadying breath. Our killer sees life as performance, and they engineered Lagrange's death as their masterpiece. Miles met her gaze. Then it's time we crash the final act. He slung his jacket over his shoulder. Let's bring them into the light and strip away every mask they've worn. As they climbed the ladder toward Antoine's courtyard, the city's humid air enveloped them once more. Above, the jasmine-scented balconies promised beauty. Below, a network of betrayal lay exposed, and Miles Harrington knew that the killer's biggest fear was not the bayou's darkness, but the daylight bearing down on their secrets. Chapter 7. Bayou Whispers. Night had settled over Bayou St. John like a velvet cloak, silencing even the most persistent cicadas. Miles Harrington crouched in the back of an unmarked NOPD stakeout boat, its engines idling so low they might never have been turned on. Beside him, Detective Anya Dupré scanned the shoreline through high-powered binoculars, the beam of their handheld spotlight cutting swaths through the inky darkness. They were positioned near an old wooden dock, one of the last places Mira Lagrange had been seen alive, according to phone tower pings. Tonight they hoped to catch whoever had lured her here. The humid air smelled of marsh grass and river mud, heavy with the promise of summer storms. In the distance, the soft splash of a paddle against water echoed like a hesitant heartbeat. "Someone's coming," Dupré whispered, raising the spotlight. A lone figure emerged from the reeds, moving with surprising grace through the knee-high water. He carried nothing but a small leather satchel swung by his side. His clothes, dark trousers and a soaked blazer, clung to him, and his hat was tilted low. As he reached the dock's end, he paused and looked out across the bayou, as if expecting a guest. Miles leveled his binoculars. "That's the man from the photographs, or the trenchcoat figure." Dupré tapped the radio, but the transmission cut out in a hiss. Miles shook his head at the unreliable swamp frequencies. They would have to act on sight alone. "Let's move in," he whispered, slipping off the boat. The two agents waded through the still water, silent as ghosts, until they crouched behind the dock's rotting pilings. The figure set the satchel on the planks and knelt beside it, unbuckling the flap. He withdrew several small vials and a length of crimson thread. Miles's pulse quickened, another gris-gris charm, and unmistakably fresh. The killer was here, performing another ritual. Suddenly the figure spoke, a low gravelly voice that carried over the water. "Lady Lagrange, your story deserves a proper end." He dripped a vial's contents onto the dock, and the thread absorbed the liquid, darkening like congealing blood. Then he traced a looping symbol in the wood grain and muttered a chant in French Creole. Dupré blinked. "They're using Lagrange's language, her heritage, against her." Miles's mind raced. This was more than intimidation. It was a mockery of her roots. Whoever orchestrated this knew her intimately. As the ritual reached its crescendo, the figure paused, then reached into the satchel again, this time producing the battered trumpet mouthpiece they'd recovered from the club. He pressed it against the symbol, muttering one last phrase. Then, as abruptly as he'd appeared, he stood and disappeared into the reeds, leaving only the faint echo of his footsteps. Miles and Dupré sprang to their feet and advanced, flashlights sweeping the shoreline. But the only response was the murmur of water against the pilings and the soft creak of an old sign swinging overhead. They found the satchel abandoned, its contents scattered. More charms, empty vials, and a folded sheet of notebook paper. Miles retrieved the paper and unfolded it. In careful script read, a single line at the bottom, Bayou Chapel, 3 a.m. Dupré's eyes widened. "That's the old Episcopal chapel downriver, shut for decades." Miles folded the note and pocketed it. "They're leading us to the next performance." He glanced back at the water, the stillness suddenly oppressive. "If we wait for them, we'll miss our chance. We need to be there before 3. They returned to the boat, and Dupré cranked the engine. As the vessel cut a path through the bayou's glassy surface, Miles stared at the ripples fading into the moonlit night. "This killer wants to choreograph every scene," he said quietly. "They gave us the time and place for the final act." Dupré frowned. "Do we set up a perimeter around the chapel, or try to sneak inside and apprehend them backstage?" Miles considered the decrepit building looming ahead through the trees. Its steeple, half collapsed, jutted crookedly against the sky. "We do both. We surround the chapel quietly, officers around the perimeter, and we'll enter through the broken stained glass window." As they disembarked, Miles sensed the weight of the bayou pressing in, the hush of the swamp, the chorus of distant frogs. Here, where music once drifted from Sunday services, they would find their killer, and perhaps at last learn why Mira Lagrange's final note had been silenced so cruelly. At 2:45 a.m., they slipped into positions. Dupré and 2 uniformed officers fanned out behind collapsed gravestones, flashlights dimmed. Miles crawled through the jagged glass opening, flashlight clipped to his collar. The chapel's interior was a cavern of shadows, pews overturned, insect carcasses littering the aisle, and at the front, the altar collapsed under the weight of moss and debris. There, kneeling in a pool of moonlight, was the trenchcoat figure. Back-turned, he arranged candles in a semicircle and carefully placed the trumpet mouthpiece at the center, surrounded by wilted rose petals. Behind him, scrawled on the altar wall, the same symbol they'd seen at the balcony cellar. Miles cleared his throat. "Don't move." The man froze, shoulders tensing. He rose slowly, turning. Under the brim of his hat, Miles recognized the face from the negatives. The unassuming art magazine photojournalist, James Harris. His eyes shone with fanatic intensity. "Detectives," Harris said, voice calm. "I knew you would come." Dupré emerged through the broken door, gun drawn. "You've got nowhere to run." Harris smiled sadly. "I never wanted to kill her. I wanted to immortalize her truth. She hid behind glamour and music. Her debts, her secrets. This performance. It was for her. For history. Miles stepped forward. You used her life as your stage, then ushered her off it. Harris looked at the mouthpiece. The final note. She never played it. I gave her the chance. Dupré cuffed him. Your version of truth ends in murder. Harris's eyes flicked to the altar symbol. Art is the lie that reveals the truth. She was a lie. Miles shook his head. Your truth is a delusion. He hauled Harris to his feet. It ends now. As they led him away, the candles guttered, and the chapel settled back into silence. Outside, the bayou stirred for a moment, then fell still once more. And in that quiet, Miles wondered whether the music of New Orleans could ever heal the wounds of a performance gone horribly wrong. Chapter 8, Carnival of Mirrors. The Grand Marquis Hotel's ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, each prism fracturing candlelight into 1,000 dancing motes. It was the eve of Mardi Gras, and Owen Dupont's invitation-only masquerade promised New Orleans's most exclusive revelry. Miles Harrington slipped through the gilded archway in a tailored tuxedo and Venetian mask. Every inch the urbane detective, yet acutely aware that beneath these opulent mirrors, someone wanted him blinded. Detective Dupré was already at the bar, scanning the crowd for Henri Leclerc. A line of costumed guests stretched along the ornate balcony, peering down at the assembled throng of waltzing couples, masked courtiers, and stilt-walking jesters. The scent of magnolia-infused champagne and spiced praline canapes hung thick in the air. Targets? Miles murmured, slipping beside her. Dupont's at table 7, Leclerc at table 4, Dupré replied, tapping her phone discreetly. Leclerc's in a gold wolf mask, Dupont in a dark raven. Miles nodded. Let's split up. I'll circle the balcony. You keep eyes on the floor. If either tries to slip away, signal me. She extended a gloved hand, and they parted. Dupré melting into the dancers below, Miles ascending the grand staircase. At the balcony's edge, he surveyed the scene. Gilded mirrors lining the walls, each reflecting distorted fragments of masked faces. It was a carnival of reflections, everyone watching themselves while hiding from scrutiny. Miles spotted Leclerc first, mid-50s, silver hair brushing his collar, wolf mask glinting in the lamplight. He was deep in conversation with a lineage of art patrons, his gestures measured, his expression tight. Miles edged closer, but a sudden commotion at the far end of the balcony snapped his attention. A masked woman in emerald silk gasped and stumbled out of the crowd, clutching her throat. Her mask clattered to the floor, revealing wide, terrified eyes. Before Miles could react, the lights dimmed and a hush swept the room. Dupont's voice boomed from the dais. Welcome, friends. Tonight we celebrate and unmask truths long hidden. A hush of anticipation rippled through the guests. Suddenly the herald's trumpet trumpeted, a discordant fanfare that shattered the festivity. Masks shifted as panicked guests turned toward the back entrance. A figure dressed entirely in mirrored panels, an unsettling facsimile of the ballroom itself, emerged, raising a hand that caught every glint of light. In the hush, Miles recognized that mirrored suit, the same figure who'd slipped behind Harris in the Court of Shadows, an accomplice, or perhaps the true mastermind. Without hesitation, Miles vaulted across the railing and dropped to the marble floor. The mirrored suspect darted through the crowd, each step scattering reflections like broken glass. Guests shrieked and dove for cover, their masks askew, gowns twirling in alarm. Miles sprinted after the figure, weaving between dancers and overturning a table of hors d'oeuvres in his wake. A swirl of costumed bodies parted before him, and he chased the glinting fugitive toward the grand ballroom doors, only to find them locked. A wall of bodies blocked the way. He vaulted onto a low table to clear a path, drawing the suspect's attention. The mirrored figure halted, pivoted, and plastic shards from the costume rattled. A signal. In that instant, Two other masked accomplices leapt from the balconies overhead and joined the chase, diving toward the ballroom's back exit in strobe-lit chaos. Miles dropped down and pursued through a side corridor. He burst into an antechamber lined with gilt mirrors, each reflecting the pursuit tenfold, multiplying every masked silhouette. His heart pounded as he blinked against the kaleidoscope of moving images. He darted past an overturned chaise, straining to pick out the real target among the dozens of mirrored replicas. At the far end, a heavy velvet curtain fluttered. He ripped it aside and emerged into a narrow service hallway, fluorescent lights harsh and unforgiving after the ballroom's warm glow. The mirrored figure stopped at a fire door, frantically rotating a key on a jangling ring. Miles closed the distance. "Stop!" he barked, drawing his badge. The figure turned, mask shattered on one side, revealing the angular face of Simone, Club L'Absinthe's bartender. Simone's eyes darted with desperation. "You don't understand," she hissed. "They made me do it." She yanked the door open and barreled through, slamming it shut behind her. Miles threw himself against it, hand on her shoulder, but she slipped free and disappeared down a service stairwell. He battered the door with his shoulder. "Dupré," he called into his radio. "Simone's escaping through the service stairs, 2 levels down." Moments later, Dupré's voice crackled back. "On my way." She appeared at the corridor's entrance, sidearm drawn. Together they raced down the narrow stairwell, feet echoing on concrete. At the stairwell's base, they emerged into an underground garage crammed with luxury sedans and masked limousines. Simone darted past rows of vehicles, her mirrored mask shards glinting like broken eyes, toward a black SUV idling by a rear exit. Miles lunged, grabbing Simone's arm as she reached the passenger door. She whirled, flinging a fist that clipped his jaw. He staggered, but caught her wrist, yanking her backward. Dupré flanked them, gun drawn, as Simone collapsed to her knees. Breathing hard, Simone's mask tumbled away. DuPont, Leclerc. They promised to protect the singer's legacy. They orchestrated everything. Harris, the rituals. I was just the distraction. Miles knelt beside her. "Why unmask her here?" he asked quietly. She closed her eyes. The final performance had to happen in front of those who silenced her. They wanted confession, spectacle. Her voice cracked. "They blackmailed me to play along." Dupré cuffed her gently. "The carnival's over, we'll sort out the rest." Outside the garage, the first carnival floats rumbled past, horns blaring and music swelling. The city unawares that beneath its celebrations, the web of lies was unraveling. Miles rose, dusting off his jacket, and gazed up at the starless sky. In New Orleans, every mirror hides a truth, and tonight a dozen reflections led him to one. The killer's circle was collapsing, but the final unmasking of Owen DuPont and Henri Leclerc still lay ahead, and Miles Harrington was ready for the grand denouement. Chapter 9. Requiem for the Crescent City. The abandoned municipal music hall on Basin Street loomed like a tomb, its crumbling stucco facade scarred by graffiti, shutters hanging from rusted hinges, and the wrought-iron marquee sagging under decades of neglect. Miles Harrington and Detective Dupré arrived just before midnight, the streets eerily silent, except for the distant rumble of a single Mardi Gras float returning to its barn. They carried only what they needed: badges, flashlights, and a determination honed by 8 harrowing chapters of deceit. This was DuPont's last known wire transfer location, Dupré whispered, as they slipped under the front archway. Leclerc Holdings cleared out a sizable payment 10 days ago, enough to rent this place for a private event. Miles clicked on his light. The entrance hall stretched before them, shattered tile, a dusty grand piano on its side, and torn posters for long-forgotten symphonies peeling from the walls. He knelt to inspect faint footprints in the dust, shoes with well-worn soles, size 10, the same pattern matched at Club L'Absinthe's service exit. "They used the tunnel network beneath Antoine's," he murmured. "Came through the cellar, surfaced here. No wonder no one saw them slip away." Dupré swept the beam to the stage beyond. "Should we call for backup?" He shook his head. "Too late. If they're expecting police, they'll vanish. We move quietly and catch them in the act." Together they crept down the corridor, pausing at a double door marked Orchestra Pit. Behind it they heard low voices, Owen Dupont's urbane drawl, Henri Leclerc's sharp retort. Miles pressed an ear to the door. "She had to be silenced," Dupont murmured. "The blackmail letters, the photographer's exposures, it all led back to me. We needed finality." Leclerc scoffed. "Finality or spectacle, Owen? You wanted this to be more than a murder, an artistic statement." His voice grew cold. "I provided the funding. You staged the ritual. Harris documented it. Simone distracted the police. Now we dismantle the evidence here. No loose ends." A third voice, a soft, fanatic whisper, joined them. "And I will orchestrate her requiem. Tonight the horn's last note will echo through these halls." Miles exchanged a look with Dupré. "It's Harris," he said under his breath. "He's been recording sound bites, building a final audio piece." Dupré nodded. "We go on 3. She raised her hand, counting down. 3, 2, 1. They burst through the doors in unison, flashlights and badges raised. Dupont spun, eyes wild, reaching for something behind the podium. A silver case. Leclerc froze near a rigged speaker array, wires snaking toward the orchestra pit. Harris stood center stage, trumpet mouthpiece in hand, poised above a lone microphone. "Stop!" Miles barked. "Hands where we can see them." Dupont hissed, yanking open the silver case to reveal a vial of crimson liquid, identical to the ritual blood. "You're too late, detective," he spat. "The Requiem is already recorded. In 5 minutes, I release it online. Mira's final note mixed with the curse chant. The city will revere or revile it forever," Leclerc sneered. "Her legacy immortalized as horror. Art remembers even when people forget." Harris raised the mouthpiece to his lips. "And I'll play the true final note," he murmured. With a swift motion, he pressed the metal against his wrist, just above his pulse. Miles dove forward, tackling Harris around the waist. The mouthpiece clattered across the stage as they crashed into the microphone stand, wires sparking. Harris fought back, teeth bared, but Dupré lunged in and cuffed him before he could draw the vial's stopper. Dupont and Leclerc scrambled for the exits. Dupré shone her light on the speaker rig. "I'm cutting power," she called, yanking at the cables. The speakers hissed, then fell silent. Miles pinned Harris to the floor. "You won't be playing a note tonight," he growled. He recovered the mouthpiece from the dust and pocketed it. "You used her music to bend truth, then betrayed her completely." Harris's eyes held a twisted pride. "It was for the purity of art, for the revelation of truth," he spat. "I loved her voice. I wanted everyone else to feel its echoes long after she was gone." Dupré emerged from behind the speaker array, gun trained on Dupont as he hesitated at the side exit. "Move away," she ordered, "or you're next." Dupont froze, gaze flicking between them. "It's not over," he hissed, but his bravado dissolved as uniformed officers swarmed in through side doors, sheepish faces reflected in shards of broken mirrors. Leclerc's shoulders slumped, and he raised his hands in surrender. Miles rose, breathing hard, and surveyed the scene. Harris cuffed and subdued, blood-stained vial abandoned at the podium, the stage strewn with ritual items, candles, charms, and wilted petals. In the dusty silence, the grand piano's fractured keys seemed to mourn. He approached the rigged speakers, now dark. "You tried to weaponize fear in music," he said quietly, "but you forgot the most powerful note resonates in justice." He clicked on his radio. "Evidence secured. Suspects in custody. Scene clear." Dupré joined him at the edge of the stage, wiping dust from her gloves. "What do we tell the press? Art installation gone wrong?" Miles smiled grimly. "Truth is stranger than fiction. Let them see the Requiem's real creators. Dupont's greed, Leclerc's vanity and Harris's madness, and let Mira Lagrange's real final note be the silence they dared to break. Below them, officers guided the culprits away through the broken auditorium doors. Outside, the distant strains of Mardi Gras brass bands drifted through the night, warm, live music reclaiming the streets from darkness. Miles watched the dead theater fade behind them. In New Orleans, every note mattered, every silence spoke, and tonight the city's true requiem was one of justice, a melody that refused to die. Chapter 10. After the Last Note. Dawn broke over the French Quarter in shy pastels, the riot of Mardi Gras now nothing more than scattered beads and upturned chairs bathed in gentle sunlight. Miles Harrington stood on the steps of Central Station, watching the morning bustle of officers, filing reports and cleaners sweeping confetti from the sidewalks. The city's pulse had resumed its steady rhythm. Brassy, alive, undeterred. Yet for Miles, the echoes of the past 10 nights still hummed in his mind, a cadence of ritual, murder, and music. Detective Anya Dupré joined him, clutching a thick dossier stamped "Case Closed." She offered him a travel mug of chicory coffee, dark, bold, and unmistakably New Orleans. He accepted it with a nod, the steam rising between them like a fleeting melody. 8 arrests, Dupré said, voice tired but triumphant. Dupont, Leclerc, Harris, Simone, and the others, who helped launder the evidence and stage the rituals, each charged with conspiracy, murder, and obstruction of justice. She tapped the dossier. We laid out the entire scheme. Blackmail years in the making, the staged voodoo rites, the tunnel network. You name it. Miles sipped his coffee. A symphony of deception, he murmured, then smiled wryly. But we found every note. Dupré returned his smile. New Orleans owes you one, and so do I. He shrugged. Just doing my job. Besides, he added, gesturing toward the quarter's awakening streets, this city gave me more than just another case. It reminded me why I became a detective, to untangle lies, to give every victim their true final note. Across the street, the first tourist trolley rattled past, its conductor calling out, "Bienvenue! Enjoy the city!" Miles watched as a group of newcomers snapped photos of wrought-iron balconies and pastel-painted courtyards, oblivious to the crimes that had transpired beneath their feet. He felt a pang of protectiveness for them, and for Mira Lagrange, whose own fans still believed she'd vanished by tragedy, not malevolence. "Have you notified her family?" he asked Dupré. "They deserve the full truth." She nodded. "Her sister arrived last night. We briefed her while you were in the station. She requested no funeral rites, just a private memorial. Mira wouldn't have wanted more spectacle." Dupré sighed. "I think she'd find some grim irony in that." Miles folded his arms. "We owe her peace, then. No more curses, no more staged rituals, just silence and then remembrance." They walked side by side down Basin Street, passing the boarded-up music hall now surrounded by yellow crime scene tape. A small crowd had gathered, a mix of mourners and curious onlookers. Flowers and candles lay at the entrance, an impromptu shrine inscribed with notes. "Your song lives on. Rest in harmony, and we hear your voice." Dupré paused, her gaze softening. "They know the truth now, and it's better than any myth." Miles knelt to add his own tribute, a single trumpet valve he'd recovered from the evidence locker. He pressed it gently into the soil beneath a fading Mardi Gras mask. "Every musician leaves a mark, Anya. Some resonate longer than others." She knelt beside him. "She'll resonate forever." They rose as a uniformed officer approached, saluting. "Detectives, we've arranged for the final evidence hearing to be held here, at the music hall. A public ceremony. The district attorney wants the site's symbolism to underscore justice's triumph over fear." Miles studied the crumbling marquee overhead. The music hall's windows were boarded, but through the cracks one could almost hear the instruments warming up, an orchestra waiting to reclaim its stage. He nodded. "Let's do it." At noon, the DA spoke before cameras and gathered press, flanked by Miles, Dupré, and Mira's tearful sister. "Today, The DA's voice rang clear. "We deliver our verdict not just against individuals, but against the blight of corruption that sought to weaponize our city's heritage." He paused, glancing at the boarded archway. "Let this hall, once a haven of melody and memory, now stand as a monument to truth, and let every note that echoes within these walls be a requiem for those who tried to silence justice." As the ceremony concluded, a local jazz quartet stepped onto a makeshift stage beyond the tape, playing a mournful but hopeful dirge. Miles stood back, letting the notes wash over him, each one a tribute to Mira's real talent and to the resilience of a city that refused to be cowed by superstition or greed. When the last chord faded, Dupré touched his arm. "You heading back to New York?" He swallowed and looked at the crowd. Investigators gathering evidence, citizens laying down offerings, press packing away cameras. "Not just yet," he replied. "New Orleans still has stories to tell, and I want to hear them in full." He took a breath, savoring the humid air scented with magnolia and possibility. "Besides, I owe this city a proper goodbye, and maybe a proper farewell to Mardi Gras." Dupré laughed softly. "You're always chasing the next case, Miles." He grinned. "And this one taught me there's more to solving a crime than clues and evidence. It's about listening to the city's heartbeat, and the silences in between." He raised his travel mug. "To New Orleans, then. May its music never die." Dupré raised her cup in return. "To New Orleans." They stood quietly as the jazz quartet shifted into an upbeat second-line tune. Miles tapped his foot to the rhythm as revelers, once oblivious, now enlightened, began to dance in the street. Beads flew through the air in improvised throws. Laughter and trumpet calls mingled in a triumphant finale. Miles Harrington watched the city reclaim its banner. No longer a stage for murder, but a living, breathing symphony of resilience. And as he finally turned toward the airport shuttle, he carried with him not just a closed case, but the enduring melody of a place that had tested his limits and, in return, taught him that truth, like music, could lift even the heaviest of hearts. End of chapter and end of story. Please like and subscribe to support our channel, and to listen to more murder mysteries and investigative stories.